we have had our first look at Dumbledore from the HBO Harry Potter TV show. John Lithgow in full Dumbledore costume on a beach. So first things first, he looks quite a lot like Richard Harris's Dumbledore, right? Who I've always thought was closer to the book descriptions. Like his hair being white rather than grey, his robes being a little bit more colourful rather than grey. Michael Gambon really was just Dumbledore's version of Gandalf the Grey, right? Very grey version of the character. Anyway, Lithgow's robes here are fairly colourful, fairly flamboyant. Like, they're still not quite as out there as, like, the Dumbledore illustrations we've had in the past. Like, look how all over the place this is in terms of colour and pattern. But he still does look sort of a bit softer, a little bit more quirky. Obviously, until we see his personality and his dialogue and stuff, and a wider range of his wardrobe, we won't know the full extent of how quirky and whimsical he is. So far from these pictures, he looks really cool. He is on a beach, which is unusual. Like, I'm trying to think where in the first book he would be on a beach. My first thought was maybe he's sending Hagrid off to get Harry. You know, when the Dursleys run away from Privet Drive and they get a boat and they go out and stay in this hut in the middle of the sea before Hagrid knocks the door down and gives the whole, "You're a wizard, Harry." I was like, maybe we're getting a scene of Dumbledore on the beach sending Hagrid out to sea to chase them. But that feels very much like, if Dumbledore's there, why isn't he going himself? Like, oh, Hagrid, I've got knitting patterns on me, I don't want to get wet. This going in the sea is beyond me. You go. You're an elf who can't do magic, so if you drown, it's no big deal. So that was the first thought that I had, but I just don't think it makes sense to randomly add Dumbledore to that scene. I put it on my Instagram story about him being on a beach being weird, and some people DM'd me saying that maybe they're pre-recording scenes for future seasons. Like, maybe this is from the Half-Blood Prince. Maybe it'll be used years later as a flashback to Dumbledore investigating Horcruxes, being taken to the coast by the cave. And that could work. I've thought about that before, about TV shows pre-recording flashbacks, so that in 5 years' time they don't have to try and de-age somebody by 5 years. But the thing is, in TV, so much is unpredictable. Like, God forbid anything happens to John Lithgow like it did Richard Harris. If they have a different actor by season 6, it would be very, very strange to see John Lithgow appearing in the flashbacks when a new actor is playing Dumbledore. Like, actors have to be written out of projects for all kinds of reasons. Whether that's tragedies, or they might be arrested or recast for whatever reason. Maybe they just can't agree on pay, and so they end up being recast halfway through. I know that happened to War Machine from the Iron Man films, for example. And I know one of Crabbe and Goyle, I can never remember which one, went to prison, right? Or just got into some hot water with the law, which is why Blaze has a bigger part in the later movies. And so the idea of pre-recording flashbacks years in advance just feels almost like you're tempting fate, right? And I just think these studios and these production companies, they have to be mindful of their budgets, and they're not going to be spending season 1's budget on scenes they may or may not use for season 6. They're going to be using season 1's budget to make season 1 as good as it can be. So I don't think this can be a pre-recording of a future season either. Then it occurred to me that I have made a video before about the missing 24 hours in Harry Potter. Like, Voldemort dies and the Potters are killed, and we have 24 hours where Vernon goes to work, he sees all these wizards and witches celebrating, but Harry isn't brought to the Dursleys' house until later that night. And since the Potters were killed at night on Halloween, there's 24 hours between the Potters dying and Harry being dropped off at Privet Drive. And so what happened in those 24 hours? How long does it take Hagrid to get to Godric's Hollow, to dig Harry out? What does he do with him for part of that 24 hours? Because when he arrives in Privet Drive, he makes it sound when he's talking to Dumbledore like he went straight there. You know, he says how Harry fell asleep just over Bristol. Now, people have said that's a plot hole because why would you be flying over Bristol? But I think Hagrid was maybe following the motorway, so doing the M5 up from Godric's Hollow to Bristol and then following the M4 towards London before he hits Surrey and Privet Drive. Anyway, those plot holes are besides the point. My point is, maybe in those 24 hours, Dumbledore has things to do before he can get to Privet Drive. You know, their big formidable enemy has just been defeated. Obviously, Dumbledore is not certain he's gone forever. So he probably has some things he needs to set in place. People to see, covert operations to call off. He probably needs to speak to the Ministry, help them strike while the iron is hot now, chasing down the other Death Eaters. Sort of feels like how the scene would be at the end of the Goblet of Fire when Voldemort is resurrected and Dumbledore has all these plans he needs to get in place. He needs to send Lupin off to speak to the werewolves. He needs to send Hagrid and Madame Maxime off to speak to the giants. He needs to assemble the Order of the Phoenix, try and get Fudge to be doing certain things. And so to make sure civilization can bounce back quickly, I imagine Dumbledore will have similar things he needs to put in place after Voldemort's first downfall. So that was my main thought of what this scene with him on the beach could be. You know, looking at these pictures, trying to figure out if anything he's wearing could give us any clues. I saw this pole in this picture, and at first I thought it was like one of those stunt wires. You know, if somebody gets blasted back by an explosion, the wire that pulls them really quickly backwards so it looks like they're being blasted into the air. But I was like, it's on his front. Why would Dumbledore be being thrust forwards, pulled forwards with vigor such that he needs a wire? And then I got really worried that they were going to make Dumbledore fly. You know how the movies made the Death Eaters fly? I was like, oh, I really hope they're not doing that to Dumbledore. And as somebody who spent £50,000 on a film degree that I've not really used, I realised much later than I should have, this is just a really long boom pole. It's what they use to get the microphones close to the actors when the camera and the crew have to be a little bit further away because the shot is maybe a wider shot. So thankfully, it doesn't look like they're gonna make him randomly fly across the beach. Anyway, I had all these thoughts about what this scene of Dumbledore on the beach could be, and then we got a few extra pictures, and it seems that this is being taken on the coast in the West Country where Dumbledore is meeting up with the Flamels. This is Nicolas Flamel and potentially his wife, and I think people are saying this is the same actor who played Flamel in the Fantastic Beasts films, which I only saw once a very long time ago and can't remember the actor, so I will just take their word for it. And Nicolas Flamel and his wife, very famously, lived a very long time thanks to the Philosopher's Stone, and they lived their life peacefully in Devon, the greatest county. So Dumbledore here on the beach is probably going to meet, or on his way back from meeting, Nicolas Flamel and his wife, which obviously is not something that happens in the first book. They are giving us wider context on something. So the question is, what? And if it's regarding Nicolas Flamel and the stone, there are two options. The first option is that this is all happening before Harry goes to Diagon Alley with Hagrid and retrieves the stone from Gringotts, and that Dumbledore is meeting with Flamel to discuss the stone and the need to tighten security around it. You know, we never really get the context around why Flamel agreed to hide the stone with Dumbledore. Presumably they knew somehow that Voldemort was coming after it. We don't know how they knew that. We don't know what whispers they'd had of Voldemort coming from wherever he was in hiding for a decade to get the stone. Who had told them that that might be happening? What clues had there been that Voldemort was maybe back? So it would be cool getting that context, finding out how Dumbledore knew and how he convinced Flamel to let him look after the stone. And that could well be the scene that they're filming here, giving us that context, that wider understanding of the story. Because at the moment they also seem to be filming a lot of stuff from earlier in the book. You know, we've had Vernon going to work the day that Voldemort died. We've had the day at the zoo with the Dursleys and Piers Polkiss. We've had a bunch of fishermen being called in to film in Cornwall, which suggests it's the scene of Vernon running away from Privet Drive because of all the letters and taking his family out to that hut in the middle of the sea before Hagrid comes and tells Harry he's a wizard. We are also reportedly getting Godric's Hollow scenes being filmed next week as well. And that's apparently going to be filmed in Lustley in Devon, which is not far from where I live. So I actually drove up there and filmed a vlog walking around the village, trying to figure out which bits would be which. You know, where would the Potters lived? Where would Bathilda live? Where's the church and the monument and the graveyard? I'm just editing that video, but in a couple of days that will be out. When it's out, there'll be a link in the description. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. But all of that is to say, we seem to be at the moment getting a lot of scenes from early in the book, from before Harry goes to Hogwarts. Which is why maybe this scene with Dumbledore and the Flamels could be the pre-moving the stone from Gringotts scene, giving us that context. But if my film degree taught me anything, besides not being able to identify boom poles, it's that things aren't filmed chronologically. And what's more likely is that it's just they're doing the southwest locations in bulk. And most of that happens to be earlier in the book. Godric's Hollow, the hut in the sea, and where the Flamels live. But giving us a scene with Dumbledore and the Flamels early in the book kind of ruins the mystery when Harry, Ron and Hermione are trying to figure out exactly who Nicolas Flamel is, why Harry has heard that name before. So probably they're just filming this location because right now is when they're doing the southwest locations, and actually we're going to get the scene at the end where Dumbledore convinces the Flamels to give up the stone, to put their affairs in order, and after hundreds of years, finally letting nature take its course and passing away. Anyway, those are my first thoughts about the pictures we've had of Dumbledore and of the Flamels. If you want to hear me react to other pictures that have been leaked from the sets, you can check out this video. Otherwise, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.